Okay, so moving on to the Eastern Front, go ahead and take a second and prepare a new quad chart. Remember, fill in everything from those four areas of the quad chart that I talk about or you see on the slides, and also anything that's highlighted in yellow on the slides. So today's essential question is what Eastern Front developments had an impact on World War I? When we talk about developments on the Eastern Front, we're specifically mentioning battles and some political troubles that countries were going through. We'll start off with Russia's war strategy. Their strategy was called Plan 19, and upon the outbreak of hostilities, Russia had planned to initially invade Eastern Prussia with four armies. And they assumed correctly that Schlieffen was going to accept risk and not heavily defend basically Germany's back door, but he would put the majority of his forces toward the defeat of France on the Western Front. So if you look at the battlefield initially, everything forces in blue up here are Russian, everything in red are German and Austria-Hungarian. So if you're looking up in the area that they were trying to attack, there's not a lot of German forces. The majority of the forces down here are Austria-Hungarian forces, which really, makes it look like Austria-Hungary posed a greater threat to Russia than Germany. Perhaps they should have initially attacked Austria-Hungary instead of Germany. So there's a conversation about that in the Russian military leadership, and they decided to kind of split that into and isolate those armies from Austria-Hungary in the south and only attack Prussia with two armies. And the two armies that they decided to attack with are in command, First Army by Paul Rennenkampf and the Second Army by Alexander Samsonov. And I think the goal was for them to converge on a location called Tannenberg, where that German single army was formed. And I think had it went off as planned, it would have been very successful, except that neither one of these guys would talk to each other. Rennenkampf and Samsonov had a long family history. Think like the Hatfields and McCoys. They just hated each other, so much to the point that they wouldn't communicate. They wouldn't coordinate the movements of their units, which is dangerous in modern warfare. Their radio signals from one army to the other, their messages had to be transmitted all the way back to Russian high command and decoded and then sent down to the other army because they wouldn't talk directly, which meant they used different types of encryption methods. And at times, they completely stopped encrypting their messages. So their message were really sent in open form, which made them easy to intercept. And it really set the stage for poor leadership in a battle that should have been very easy for the Russians to go in and win. Well, that's what it looked like to the German army in Eastern Prussia, and their commander initially advocated for, let's get the heck out of here because there's two Russian armies that are about to converge on me, and I'm going to get destroyed. So the Kaiser removed him, and he placed Hindenburg and Ludendorff in charge. Remember from the last lesson, these were the two military dictators. Ludendorff was the guy who formed the field manuals on defensive strategy, and Hindenburg was the retired general who came back on active duty status and was ultimately the one that started targeting merchant ships with submarines. So these guys are now in charge. They pull Pritwitz out of there and ultimately take over the battle. And it's converges on the Battle of Tannenberg. And what we start to learn later is even though it looked like an easy Russian victory, one of the things, by not communicating to each other encrypted messages, the Germans were able to intercept and interpret what was actually happening. And they knew that the two generals weren't coordinating with each other. So as the one army moves forward to kind of what should have been a surrounding of the German Eighth Army, the German Eighth Army moves in and actually cuts off Rennenkampf and Samsonov and completely surrounds General Samsonov. And in doing so, captures or kills 95,000 people, or captured 95,000, killed 30, and then Samsonov, in shame, commits suicide. And what really should have been an easy defeat on the Eastern Front, easy win for the Russians, a catastrophic defeat for the Germans on the Eastern Front really gives Germany an advantage moving forward against Russia. So after Tannenberg, the Triple Entente, remember that's the United Kingdom, France, and Russia at this time. They declare the war on the Ottoman Empire. So this war is starting to grow and expand. And that causes the Ottomans to join with Germany and continue their push. But they really focus all of their efforts fighting against Russia. So Russia is getting beaten pretty bad by Germany after Tannenberg. Russia is now getting beaten up pretty good by the Ottomans as well. And it just really leads to them being out-killed on the battlefield. Now, the one thing that Russia has, they're not very technologically advanced. One thing they have as a very, very poor nation and poor army is people. So they just keep throwing bodies at it, and that causes morale to go lower and lower and lower. One guy kind of rises up and he wants to change the strategy, and he wants to focus their tactics on weak points, which is really what they should have been doing all along. And that name is General Alexei Brusilov. And what General Brusilov wants to do is he wants to confuse the enemy by attacking in multiple positions. So instead of making a massive bombardment and attacking with everything in one place, he doesn't do that bombardment. He uses limited bombardments, and he honestly bombards specific areas that he's trying to deny the enemy access to instead of exactly where he's going to attack. And then he attacks at several locations along a long spread out front line. So the enemy can't really focus on that. And remember, he's going to focus this against the Austro-Hungarians. He also advances artillery in secrecy under cover of darkness. And he tries to do that in cooperation with the infantry, so they're much closer to the front line and they can fire deeper against the enemy artillery, which is the way artillery really should be employed in this method. If you can take out the enemy's artillery, then you can advance your infantry much, much easier without the threat of casualties from that weapon. And then he also has his infantry dig his trench lines closer and closer through no man's land, so that their assault through no man's land becomes actually much, much smaller and faster. But Germany sees what's going on, and they rush to their ally, Austria-Hungary, and really start pressing back hard against the Russians. And they do this in a limited campaign, really, until they can push the Russians back, because at this point in time, Germany has to turn back to Verdun and concentrate those forces to try to defeat the French. And essentially, you just see Russia losing millions and millions of people, another million men lost in 1916. So they've got to do something, right? And this Kerensky offensive becomes the last Russian offensive of World War I. But there's a lot of other things going on around it. So there's a lot of internal unrest inside of Russia. And the Tsar actually, he takes off, he leaves, abdicates the throne. Why he does that is because it's this rising move of Bolshevism. So the Bolshevik Revolution, or the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution, really starts to see this rise from the people to overthrow the monarch. And that's in Russia. Well, it's going on in the army as well. So morale is low. It's terrible. And morale is a driving factor of the infantry. With high morale, an infantryman and an infantry unit will do almost anything. But with low morale, they'll do nothing. And to add to low morale and high casualties, there was this Bolshevik antagonism that kind of went on within the army. So the officers were seen as kind of agents of the Tsar, and the non-commissioned officers and soldiers were doing the fighting. They were like the people, and they're just getting thrown at machine gun bullets from the Germans. So there became instances in the Russian army where entire units would kind of decide by proxy if they were going to allow the attack to go on. An officer would come in, he would give them the orders to attack, and they'd say, if they agreed with it, they would go. And if they didn't agree with it, if morale was too low, they would refuse to attack. And you just can't run an army like that with such low morale. As the revolution continues on, Ottoman attacks continue to hit Russia. They're getting hit from both sides now. The Bolsheviks continue to gain favor and power, and this guy comes back into the scene. And actually, Lenin had a lot of support from the Germans. The Germans gave him gold. The Germans helped smuggle him into Russia as the big leader of this Bolshevik revolution. And he really did this on the idea of ending the war, right? If he could end the war, they would be able to restore their economy. They would be able to give people jobs. But the war was really not the people's war. The war was the war of these monarchs. And as the Tsar had left, it was going to be his job to really restore that order in Russia. So they pull out of the war. They sign a treaty with Germany, seceding quite a bit of land, and that really ends the conflicts out on the Eastern Front.